Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the session, Agrometeorological Information Services, Improving Farmers' Adaptation to Climate Change. We are happy to have you here. It's morning in Switzerland. And to start the session, we would like to give you a few practical information. Could you give the next slide, Sonia? So as a short technical information, please keep your microphone closed and muted if you are not speaking. If you have enough internet, please keep your camera turned on. And if you need translation for any of the sessions, you will find it at the bottom of your screen with the little globe logo. And all of the sessions are recorded. And now let's get to the session that is hosted by the Swiss NGO DRR Platform. That is a network of 90 NGOs dedicated to increasing the resilience of communities and governments in all aspects of disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. And as is already evident, climate change reduces access to food and affects food quality. For example, increasing temperatures, changes in rainfall patterns, increasing extreme weather events, and reductions in water availability all result reduced agricultural productivity. And unfortunately, it is developing countries that are suffering most from this. Especially smallholder farmers in rural areas are facing increasing difficulties in sustaining their livelihoods in the worsening climatic conditions and unpredictable weather patterns. And in order for these farmers to make good farming decisions to reach still somewhat satisfactory yields, farmers need reliable information about local weather conditions. However, accurate weather forecasts are often missing, especially in the rural areas of developing countries. And it is the poorest farmers who often don't have access to the information they need. NGOs have stepped in to run the last mile to provide farmers with weather information services, as well as practical farming recommendations based on that weather data. So in this session, we will discuss what is practically needed to establish well-functioning and sustainable agrometeorological information services to farmers in rural communities. We will focus on the question, what services need to be delivered by whom in the value chain? And today, presented in this session, are two agrometeorological projects which are implemented in differing and challenging conditions in Guatemala and Tajikistan. Then we will also present you the participatory integrated climate services for agriculture, in short PICSA. That's a research-based approach to provide climate services and agricultural extension. And now I will hand over to Sonia to present our speakers.
Yes, thank you, Maria. Thank you very much. I will now briefly present who is speaking to us today. We have great pleasure to introduce, first of all, Professor Peter Douward. Peter Douward is professor at the University of Reading in the UK. He is at the School of Agriculture, Policy and Development, and his focus lies on agricultural systems, smallholder communities, and innovation processes. And I'm also particularly glad to point out that he is working together with communities in participatory processes, including more agricultural ones, such as breeding of varieties, local varieties, or more participatory approaches with regards to innovation. Welcome, Professor Peter Doward. After the presentation on PICSA that he will deliver, we will hear from Milena Berrocal and Oscar David Calvo Solano. Milena Berrocal and Oscar Calvo Solano will talk to us about the project Resilient Altiplano, which is taking place in Guatemala. Milena herself is a thematic expert with the IUCN, with the regional office for Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. And she is joining us from Costa Rica, where it's the middle of the night. So a warm welcome to you, Milena, and thank you for staying up. She is an expert on climate change matters, on eco-risk reduction, forest restoration, adaptation-based solutions, and biological monitoring and remote sensing. So a wide array of thematics that are crucial also to our topic today. Oscar himself, who is joining us shortly, is himself an expert on climatology and early warning systems for the same regional office of the IUCN. And he is based in Guatemala, working on ecosystems and livelihoods through better watershed management. And last but definitely not least, we have with us Boris Orlovsky, who is Senior Advisor on Climate Change Adaptation at Caritas, who is also an affiliated researcher at the Department of Geography at the University of Zurich, and is an expert on statistical analysis of climate and atmosphere dynamics, and also extreme events. He is also into GIS applications and knowledge transfer to different stakeholders. Now, for this session, he will be presenting the project that Caritas is leading in Tajikistan, leveraging weather, water, and climate services for sustainable rural livelihoods and well-being. A warm welcome to you all, and great thanks for being here with us today. We are very eager to hear from you and to learn from your expertise. And therefore, I would like to get straight into the matter and give the word to you, Professor Peter Doward, to teach us or to show us what PICSA can do. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, Maria. Can you hear me okay?
We do.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me, and it's great to be joining everyone today. I'm going to start with a very practical example of a climate service and share with you some results from the use of this approach across several countries. And yeah, next slide, please. So the approach is called PICSA, Participatory Integrated Climate Services for Agriculture. I'm going to cover what it is, how it works, share with you a few results, and then explore what are the reasons for it working and for its success, and then finish by looking at the implications for sustainable implementation and what lessons we can maybe draw for PICSA, but also for other approaches as well. Next slide, please. So PICSA has been used so far in over 30 different countries at different scales. In some of those countries, it's gone to full national level, and in other countries, it's been more at a district or 2 or 3 district levels. Slide, please. It's both an extension approach and also a climate service, and it works by trained extension workers or community volunteers working with groups of farmers, taking them through a set of different activities. Next. So let me explain what PICSA is in essence. And I'm looking at a blank screen at the moment. There we are, thank you. I think it takes a bit of time to catch up. So PICSA is all about, as you can see right in the middle there, it's all about supporting small-scale farmers. And as we know well, farmers face many different challenges, climate challenges, but also many different challenges, markets, pests and diseases, access to inputs and markets, etc. But there are also lots of opportunities as well. and PICSA supports farmers to address the challenges and the opportunities that they face. Then looking at the top left of the slide, we can see that PICSA brings in climate information, forecasts, which is what you would expect, but importantly, it brings in historical records, and we'll see how important they are in a minute. Then moving across to the top right, it brings in options, or rather helps farmers to explore different options. So crop, livestock, and livelihood options that help them address their challenges and opportunities and address and use the climate information. Then going to the bottom of the slide, we can see it brings in participatory decision-making tools, which help the farmers to explore the climate information, but also to look at the different options. And then there are two principles which underpin PICSA. The first is the farmer decides. So everything is there to support the farmer make their own decision. It's not an advisory service where we're suggesting what farmers do. It's actually helping people to make their own decisions for their own contexts. And that's because people take the consequences of the decisions they make, whether things go well or not, and also because farmers have great capacity and we're trying to build on that capacity. The other principle is options by context, and that's simply recognizing that each farmer has their own unique context, in terms of their soils, their access to resources, their access to labor, maybe even their risk attitudes are different as well. So each farm is a different context, and what's best for that farm may be different to what's best for their neighbor and their fellow members of the community. So PICSA enables scaling, but it enables farmers to look at their own individual farms and contexts. Next slide, please. So there's no need to look at the detail on the right-hand side, but this just shows us that PICSA is broken down into 12 clear steps, and these are covered in a very active participatory learning way by groups of farmers, facilitated by an extension worker or community worker, through probably 4 half-day sessions, something like that. The facilitators or extension workers are trained in a 1-week training, very practical training for them. And as the farmers go through this process, they're doing group exercises and looking at things together, but they're thinking about their own individual farm. Next slide, please. So we don't have time to go into each of the steps in detail, but I'll just pull out a few of them as examples. So the first step that farmers do is to draw a very simple map of their own farm and their own livelihoods. So you can see here on this example, you have a family in the middle with a certain number of people. And as you look around their farm, you can see different fields with different crops. And they draw the map to show what activities they're doing, what resources they have, and also to begin to think about what they could change and how the climate is affecting them at the moment. The next slide, please. We then move into looking at historical climate information. This will have been produced by working closely with the Met services in country. And just for this slide and this example, you can see on the vertical axis rainfall in millimeters, and along the bottom axis, you can see the years. So this graph shows us the amount of rainfall that happened at this location in each year. And you can see how it varies, and you can see the actual amounts. Now, farmers often haven't had this information before, partly because it hasn't been analysed and made available, and because they don't keep their own rain gauges or have records going back this far. And this is extremely valuable because we talk about climate and climate change, but we often don't actually look at what is happening. And often farmers are surprised when they see what's happening, but also when they see the actual values, which they have never had before, of how many millimeters there is. This is just one of the slides, and we look at a whole range. So we look at temperature, of course, temperature variations in months. We look at the distribution of rainfall through the year. We look at things like when the seasons have started and whether that's changed over the years, the length of the season, the end of the season, and a range of different aspects of the climate. Next slide, please. Here you can see farmers, some of whom are non-literate, working out simple probabilities. So by putting a line across one of the graphs and then simply counting how many years there has been greater than a certain amount of rainfall, for example. So farmers are not only looking at the climate and what it is like, they're also beginning to analyze it using this simple probability and work out the chances of things happening. Next slide, please. We can then take that and together with other information on crops and varieties in the area, we can produce a table which would have, a much longer table than this. It would go to maybe 2 pages with all the local varieties, all the varieties that are available, and we can work out the chances of those different varieties succeeding in that location based on different start dates of the season. So farmers can then look at the chance of those crops and varieties succeeding under rain-fed conditions. Next slide, please. So having considered their own resources, what they're doing at the moment, something on the climate, they can then look at, okay, what options are there? What do we have? What can we do in this location to address climate and other challenges? Next slide, please. And we look at or the farmers look at it in terms of crops, livestock and other livelihoods. And they go through a process of listing down the left-hand side different options or practices that they think could address their challenges and opportunities. And then as a group, they discuss under a range of headings all those options. The idea here is that as it's discussed as a group under these headings, each farmer can be looking at this and thinking, okay, which one might suit my farm and my situation? And farmers can hopefully pick something that is suitable for them. And farmers will pick different things according to their own contexts. Next slide, please. And then they would go on to do what is called a participatory budget. And this is a very visual budgeting style and approach that we've developed, which helps people think through the activities, the inputs required, the timing, and what outputs they're going to produce. And it can be used as a very simple kind of what-if scenario analysis as well. People can change things like prices and look at it. So this helps people to decide, plan and decide what they want to do. Next slide, please. So what I've described so far is all happening on the left-hand side of that diagram. People are going through this process. They're thinking about the long-term climate. They're thinking about what activities might suit them over the next few years, and they're developing strategies for their farms. As we get closer to an actual season, if they're in many countries, there is a seasonal forecast produced, not in all. They can then look at the seasonal forecast, and with PICSA, we help with that process, and they can revise their plans if they think their strategies for that particular season should change. Very often they don't. They think they will carry on. Then as they get into the season, they receive the short-term forecasts and warnings in ways that many of us on this call are familiar to. And then after the season, they would review and see how things are going and make improvements for the next year. Next slide, please. So we're very careful to evaluate how PICSA is working right from the start. It started as a research project, and we wanted to learn what's working, what's not working, and we've implemented quite a rigorous evaluation process right throughout the course of PICSA. So just picking some results from across different countries here, and I'll just focus on the top line mainly. This shows us the percentage of farmers that have been trained in PICSA that are have reported making changes to their practices as a result of that. And you can see the numbers are extremely high. They vary between countries. They typically over 80% if I looked across more results. And farmers make anything from 1 change through to 12 or 13 changes in extreme cases. Typically 4 or 5 changes per farm is not uncommon. And farmers often report feeling more empowered by this process. So having been through those steps and those stages and thinking about their own farm, they feel empowered, and they feel that they have some kind of agency and ability to deal with climate, whereas before often people have felt always on the receiving end, and often that the message is always negative about climate. But this often is reported as, okay, we feel that we can do something more and address some of the challenges. Next slide, please. We also do detailed case studies to see what farmers have done and the detailed effects that it's had on them. Before I say something on that, this just gives an example of some of the different changes within crops in Malawi as an example. So we've got here in different districts, you can see that the most common change was changes in variety, followed by probably changes in management, and then actually people growing a new crop. In different countries, you'll see a different pattern. But importantly, people introduce a wide range of different changes. Next slide, please. So from detailed evaluations, we can see how the impact is individually at an individual and household level. And many of the evaluations show very positive stories from this. So this lady here, for example, changed her variety, introduced conservation agriculture, which she wasn't doing before, and then had a range of knock-on positive effects, including investing in innovation for the next season. Next slide, please. So what are the reasons for success? And I'll just go through these very quickly because of time. This focus on the farmer as the decision maker, supporting people to make their own decisions and providing them with tools and with information to make those decisions. The idea of people focusing on their own farm and their own context, I think has worked really well. I think the fact that it's integrated, so you're looking at the whole farm and that people are thinking about their whole system, which is what farmers normally do in real life, rather than looking at one specific thing. Farmers use their own extensive knowledge, and so what they get here is new tools and information, but they very much use their existing knowledge and add to that. The fact that it's step by step and quite logical and easy to implement then, and I think that the tools are relatively easy to use as well, although you're looking at quite complex things. Next slide, please. So just to finish with, I'm going to look at Malawi, which is a country where PICSA has been particularly widely used. It was introduced in 2015, working with the national organizations, the DCCMS, the Met Service, and DICE, the Extension Service. It's now reached, I put in quotes because we don't really know, but this is the figure that UNDP have given, up to 1 million farmers, but certainly hundreds of thousands of farmers. It's in national policy, and it's integrated into the ongoing activities of key organizations. Importantly, since 2015, it's been supported by a range of different projects who've helped government with resources, training and facilitating this. Next slide, please. So what do we learn from Malawi and from the reasons for success? Importantly, scoping and preparation, working with Met services to prepare the Met data, working with partners to contextualize PICSA. I put there pilot or go straight to large scale. That's an option in PICSA. You can pilot at district level and build up and gain confidence, or you can go very large and go straight to scale. In Malawi, it built up slowly. Building capacity and supporting key partners, obviously important. Ownership has been key. Ownership not just of the process, but also of data and results. And in PICSA, although we use a lot of data, that data stays with the Met Service and we never take it for analysis for ourselves. It always stays with the Met Service. Evaluation and learning, key for this, and feeding back, focusing on sustainability from the beginning, and very importantly, trying to maintain quality, particularly as more organizations become involved, and it's easy for quality to be reduced. And then we're always trying to improve and innovate on the process. Next slide, please. So this is really my last slide. So what are the roles for non-government organizations? Can you press again, please? So government extension doesn't function in some countries. So there's a huge potential there for NGOs to work with community volunteers, train local people in villages. And even where extension does work, it's only reaching a fraction of the farmers that are there. So there's scope there for NGOs to really use the process. Supporting the enabling environment. What I mean there is that farmers make changes, but they want to make more changes. and perhaps some farmers are unable to make changes. And that's because they don't have access to resources, they can't get the seed, or they can't save enough money to invest. And so joint projects where the enabling environment is supported and targeted and designed carefully in advance could be a potential win-win with PICSA, where you get both. And then finally, obviously cooperating, sharing strategies within countries and approaches with institutions together can make a huge difference. Next slide, please. Okay, so that is really what I wanted to share. The approach seems to work. There are some reasons for it working. There's certainly plenty more work to do to improve and to add and to improve in this, and certainly a role for NGOs working together with government and with research institutes. I'll finish there. If you could just go to the last slide, which has a QR code, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter, for the presentation. That was very, very interesting, and we learned a lot. And we can see that there are quite many questions already now coming in the chat from the audience. So unfortunately, we don't have time to answer all of them right now, but hopefully during the session, most of them will get answered. I would like to give you one question. It is from Oviti Zablone from Norwegian Refugee Council. And that is asking, are farmers also investing in risk management options, such as crop or livestock insurance? Do you have experience of that across all the projects you have been working with?
So the question was, are farmers investing?
Yeah, are the farmers
Absolutely,
investing?
yes. I mean, I think from that slide, which showed that 80% plus farmers are making changes, every change you make pretty much has to have some investment, whether it's your time or whether it's money or seed. So yes, so the kinds of people are definitely investing what they can afford. And even where you don't have an enabling environment, people are investing and finding ways to make changes. So yes, definitely. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think he's asking specifically in insurance options.
Okay, so insurance, yes, where we work in locations where insurance is available, but insurance is not part of what we do on the PICSA side. So if it's available through somebody else, that might be something that farmers pick up on, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I think now it's time to go on to our next presentation. And welcome, Milena and Oscar, to present your Altiplano Resilience project.
Thank you so much, and good morning for everyone. Well, this is a very long day for me, and I'm a little tired, so sorry. I will make the presentation in Spanish.
Resilient Highlands project is a project that is being developed in Guatemala, in the highlands of Guatemala, and it has to do with early warning systems regarding climate and sustainable production. Next slide, please. One of the parts of that the project works with is a climate data collection. For this, we work with the Guatemalan Weather Services, and we work jointly with them in interpreting the data regarding precipitation, temperature, wind, and with different factors that can increase risk in the field, such as forest fires and the high temperatures or low temperatures as well, when we speak about highlands. Next slide, please. We have installed about 18 meteorological stations Class A stations in different points of the highlands, different locations. This data is collected, on a weekly basis, and it's stored. The data is stored in services, and subsequently it's systematized and analyzed. With the data collected from different meteorological stations. Next slide, please. And the data interpretation is very important. This interpretation has to do with the data on rainfall and precipitation and the temperature to improve the crops and to manage the fields better. Also, the soil profile and the underground water that is found in there. The underground water is what is used to irrigate the fields, and the peripheral. This will depend on the precipitation, the water, or the water deficit that may be found. So we employ this modeling to improve data for the farmers so that they can take it in consideration at the time of planting their products, their crops. Next slide, please. We count with diverse types of data. For example, hurricane tracking data. Let's remember that 5 days ago, this parts of the hemisphere where we are located at, the hurricane season just began, which starts from the 1st of June until the 30th of November. We also handle historical hurricane and tropical storm data, precipitation data, and on electrical storms, and historical data on temperature. Next slide, please. And the data distribution is done in the following fashion. Next slide, please. The material is developed in a pedagogical way so that they can be understood by the farmers, who the majority of them are people from different indigenous peoples, such as the Mayas and the Quechis. So we develop different pedagogical materials to provide the information, the meteorological data to the producers in a simple manner and in a quick way. Next slide, please. We also have a distribution list. We send emails. We have an email distribution list with approximately 160 meteorological and agricultural technicians. We cover approximately 400 producers, and we reach them through WhatsApp. And over 6,000 people interact with their publications, with the posts via Facebook. And we also are developing an agrometeorological bulletin where we publish meteorological and climatological data regarding the different products, agricultural products, which these products require for their development. Next slide, please. We also train trainers where we train climate promoters within the different communities. And for example, at this moment, we have trained 28 indigenous women as climate promoters within their communities. Next slide, please. This training process not only is directed at the producers, but at the whole community. Let's remember that families in these areas participate The entire families participate in the production activities. They're all engaged in these activities. So we have managed to train over 4,300 small producers in 2022. And by 2023, over 6,000 producers have been trained, 3,600 of them women and 2,400 men. And as of 2024, we expect to train 19,000 people. Next slide, please. The climate information or data is key for the small producers so that they can improve their production. And thereby they can have better income, larger income, and other livelihoods. Their agricultural livelihoods can be improved, and helping them to be more resilient regarding the effects of climate change, which we are facing year by year when we're facing La Nina or El Nino climate phenomenon. So in this way, they can employ the necessary measures so that their production can keep being as sustainable as possible. I really thank you for your attention, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the interesting presentation, Milena. It was very nice to hear from your project. I would like to ask you a question from the audience. This is from Patrick, and he is asking, how much do the farmers trust the forecasts and warnings and recommendations that you are giving to them?
Confían al 100% porque no solamente tenemos distribuidos en el área 18 estaciones meteorológicas y cotejamos la información con el Servicio Meteorológico Nacional, sino que les damos la información que ellos necesitan para su producción de una forma sencilla y de una forma ágil, semana tras semana, y con la capacitación de las promotoras climáticas, los productores tienen una voz local de su propia comunidad que les brinda la información meteorológica y climática. Eso ayuda mucho a generar confianza en la comunidad.
Thank you very much. Sonia, do you see any other questions? Or would anyone from the audience like to ask something?
There is another question in the chat that came in right now. Are you actually monitoring how your information is implemented, or how it is really accessed? And what is the role of INCIVUME? I don't know how to spell it correctly. INCIVUME, the institution.
Sí, nosotros por medio.
Perdón, sí.
Sí.
As I mentioned before, we count with a WhatsApp group where over 400 people, amongst them are producers and climate promoters. We also have presence in social networks such as Facebook, where we post information and the data. We're engaged on a daily basis with the communities. We have a working group within each of the communities, and we also prepare the people. Therefore, the distribution of the data and information is done very quickly, very agile, and easy to understand, and it's available, completely available to all the producers, both men and women, who wish to access the data. We do monitor the access, and the monitoring indicates that on a monthly basis, the interest within the producers is increasing. Their interest in the weather and climate information is increasing because they understand that having this information helps them to take preventive measures in case of water stress or thermal stress in their fields.
Many thanks, Milena, for the explanations given, which take us to the heart of this project and its workings. We will have more questions about these workings in all of the presentations, but I would suggest we move on to the next presentation for now, and would like to hand over the floor to Boris for the presentation of the Caritas project in Tajikistan.
Yep. Thanks a lot. Thanks for the invitation. It has been a very inspiring session so far already. I will quickly introduce our project in Tajikistan and then close with 2 example applications of weather, water, climate services for agriculture that we have conducted. Next slide, please. So Caritas has been in Tajikistan for more than 25 years now. And one key learning from this really long-term presence is that if you look for a single most important factor which influences and controls rural livelihoods, then it's weather. And we thought that Caritas as an international NGO, no, not yet, could become a broker between the National Hydromet Service and our constituencies, or the rural farmers, and kind of become a translator between weather forecasts, early warnings, some specific agronomic advice, whatever, to make it understandable and actionable for rural farmers. However, we very soon realized that that would not work because there's actually nothing to broker. I mean, in Tajikistan, the services which are provided by the National Hydromet Services are so limited that we as an NGO couldn't add any value to that. Next slide, please. And one key reason for this limitations of Tajik Hydromet was their very sparse network of weather stations. So here these red dots indicate the locations of their weather stations. Half of them is usually not working. If you take into account that this is a very complex country, I mean, being located at the west of the Himalaya, reaching up to 7,000, I mean, a very pronounced topography, it's very evident that such a station network is not enough. Next slide, please. We of course have not been the first to realize this gap, these limitations, and other international organizations have come to the country and, for example, set up weather stations. This is an example with funding from the World Bank, and the World Bank being the World Bank, they only brought the best of the best Finnish weather stations, which cost several tens of thousands of USD. And in our discussions with Tajik Hydromet, we over time learned that they consider these stations rather as a burden than as a gift, because they're extremely challenging in maintaining, manuals only in English, whatever. That wasn't a real success story. So we thought of trying another route. Next slide, please. On taking advantage of recent advances in electronics, in sensors, and we wanted to test the potential of low-cost weather stations. And by low cost, I mean less than a few hundreds USD, so really 2 orders of magnitude cheaper than what the World Bank has tried, and a fully open source system. And the hope was that these cheaper stations still provide data which is accurate enough to provide a much improved weather forecast and services for agriculture, for natural resource management, disaster risk management, and so on, that are urgently needed. Next slide, please. So we had learned about this challenge that the National Weather or Hydromet Service was facing constantly. That is, how do we keep weather stations alive? And the proposition that we have developed together with them was that we don't bring these stations under your custody, but we rather engage with farmers or local institutions, for example, district governments, to become a host of these weather stations. So, I mean, they are very simple to maintain. Usually, you only have to change a battery every few years or so, cleaning. And so basically, this removes this burden on Tajik Hydromet to take care of an expanded network of weather stations. So, yeah, in theory, this should become such a circular value chain, as we call it. We have on the one side the farmers or the users of the services, which contribute into the system by hosting the weather stations, taking care of them, but also by providing some manual observations and feeding them into the system. The system sits under Tajik Hydromet, where this data is used for improved weather forecasts, but also dedicated weather, water, climate services, for example, recommendations for agriculture, which then feed back to the farmers. And at the center of this circular value chain, we have the national telecom companies, who, on the one hand, bring in their infrastructure to facilitate these flows of data, but can also have a role in the financial aspects of this value chain. And if you're interested, there's another session tomorrow on that. Next slide, please. So this is very technical. It's beyond what a normal NGO does, and we have therefore partnered with many institutions. So first of all, in country, you see the logos of the Tajik Hydromet Service, the Agency for Civil Defense, Ministry of Agriculture. And internationally, we receive technical support from Meteo Swiss, World Meteorological Organization, the Swiss Institute for Snow and Avalanche Research, SLF, and very importantly, we work with ICARA, so an international research institute on agriculture in the dry areas. And last but not least, this is co-funded from the Swiss government, but not only co-funded, but also jointly implemented. So they really have a crucial role when it comes to collaboration with the governmental partners at national level in country. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is a snapshot of the current network of weather stations that we have so far managed to set up. We want to double the number of stations until within the coming 12 months. So it's about a bit more than 150 weather stations right now. We've tripled the number of stations that Tajik Hydromet had so far, and this really enables now Tajik Hydromet to benefit from locally a lot more specific forecasts than before. And this setup and maintenance of the station network is becoming a joint effort between Caritas and Tajik Hydromet. I'm seeing a black screen.
Yes, I'm sorry. I don't know why. I'm trying to get back to your slide.
Yeah. You can also, maybe the next slide is better, more colorful.
Yeah, it just right now doesn't let me do anything.
It doesn't move at all.
So just bear with me.
No problem. Anyways, I mean, it's anyway, just nice pictures. So the first of these weather, water, climate services that we actually piloted was still before all these automatic weather stations. It was a very hands-on and manual approach, and for that we worked together with women farmer production groups, which we had supported and established in another project. And we equipped them with very cheap thermometers, I mean, usually for kitchen use, and instructed them to measure soil temperatures with the idea of identifying a good point in time where the soil would be warm enough for planting chickpeas. It turned out that this thermometer informed date was 2 to 3 weeks earlier than what the farmers would usually do. And this earlier planting also, of course, then meant that the chickpeas were ready for harvest 2 weeks earlier. And that in that particular season helped the crop to escape the summer heat. And it led to a tripling of the yield. That I mean both for the project team, but of course also for the involved women farmer was a very convincing evidence that using with such data can actually have a huge economic impact, and that's what we are ultimately after, because without increase in income or food or whatever, I mean even the nicest service will not be helpful and taken up. The other service that we were piloting is about irrigation. This is technically a little bit more complicated. Ah, great. If the slide is back, then
Can you
maybe.
see the slide? I
Yeah,
just tried to share
good.
them. Okay.
It's now in presenter mode.
I will just switch one moment.
No worries. And
Is it
if you
working
could,
now?
it does. If you could advance.
Yes.
Yeah, and one more, please. Yes, this one. So no, back. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, what we did manually with the women, having them measure the soil temperature once a day or twice a day, we then have automized. So our low-cost weather stations, some of them are equipped also with a temperature probe for the soil. And here this graph shows you the time series of the in last fall for one of these stations. On this would now be an application to winter wheat, where you want the soil to have reached a certain coolness, which you see here in this green bar, and then you see when the temperature has cooled enough to start planting. And this was also very interesting because again, the farmers which followed this protocol planted their wheat a few weeks earlier than it would have been done by tradition. And yeah, we are now waiting to see how this has impacted the yields. Next slide, please. Another application of these weather, water, climate services was for irrigation. So summer in Central Asia is usually dry, so for many crops you have to rely on irrigation. And this irrigation so far is done according to Soviet norms, which in practice often implies an over irrigation, which of course is not efficient in terms of water use, but also decreases yield and quality of the crops, and most importantly decreases their suitability for storage. And this is a very limiting factor, because if you're not able to store your crop over the winter months, then you run into a food or nutrition gap. And also economically, it's not ideal if everybody has to sell at the same time and the market is flooded with potato, for example. Next slide, please. So here we test on a trial site. Yes, thank you. With this app, different applications. So one would be irrigation as usual, following Soviet norms. Then another one where you irrigate as much as the crop needs, but only if you have water in the canal, which follows an independent schedule. And then a third where you have kind of an ideal situation with a reservoir, which we built on purpose, where you irrigate always optimally according to the crop needs. And here also The yield increased by some 30%. Interest is very high to take this up for further scaling. Yeah, let's see how this all evolves over the coming years. But the first indications are really encouraging. I stop here. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Boris, and sorry for the interruption, but it
No worries.
has come back, fortunately. Great presentation, many insights, very encouraging progress in this project. I would like to briefly look into the chat and look for comprehension questions for now. Some have already been answered. I see. Now, I believe this question by Kavita Gandhi Suicide is directed to you, Boris. How is traditional knowledge of farmers and the local context in that sense taken into account and integrated into the project?
Yeah, I mean this is maybe a bit of a special setting in Tajikistan, where you had many decades of Soviet rule, where agriculture was also just by decree, top down, regulated and instructed. So this traditional knowledge is, I don't know. I mean, a big part of it is just Soviet style agriculture. For example, these irrigation norms, they come from the 40s, 50s. A lot has happened. I mean, both to the climate, but also to understanding of how crops work and what they need. So in this particular context, we rather go in with a more scientific approach and not so much based on traditional knowledge, because it's all diluted and yeah, not so clear anymore there. This is probably different in other contexts.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yes, I would actually like to ask Milena, since Boris, you said it is not so relevant in your context. The same question would be also interesting to know in the context of Guatemala. Are you taking the traditional knowledge of the farmers into account, since you work with the different ethnic groups?
Yes, we take it into account, their traditional knowledge. We work with 6 indigenous peoples, 6 different indigenous groups. It's very important to respect their traditional knowledge, but also they are thankful for the scientific knowledge and the scientific data that they are now understanding, thanks to the trainings that we have been providing them. So there is a mixture between the traditional knowledge and the scientific knowledge, and with data and different techniques. But we also have to take into account and consider that currently, at this time, with what is happening with climate change and with the climate's variations that is being affected by climate change, the ancestral knowledge often is not enough, it's not sufficient to be able to forecast or to develop a long-term forecast of what can happen. So traditional knowledge regarding climate issues has used to work very well up to 50 or 25 years ago. But due to climate change, we require new instruments and new data and information that, together with that ancestral knowledge, helps people in the communities to have greater and better information, to be better prepared, and to be able to have better yields in their crops.
Thank you very much, Milena. I believe there was, just to come in here, several times the question in the chat also about what the financial means are of farmers, or maybe even provided to farmers, to actually be able to access the information, but also then put it into practice. We have seen many times now that we are linking the information even with recommendations, obviously, to be able to change course and adapt to climate change. How are they even financially supported, or what are the resources they can tap into to put this to practice? And maybe I would like to just briefly, because Boris was the last one to present, to come back to Boris, but it's a question that is really probably also different in the different projects. So maybe we start with Boris and then Milena, and then I would like to also know from Peter what is foreseen there, because that came several times in the chat.
Yeah, and I would specifically take this point from Aaron into account. So that irrigation technology, that I mean, we have some technology on this trial site now, which we need in order to do these different experiments. But the idea is that we don't bring any additional technology in the sense of pipes and drip irrigation and whatever, but just provide advice for the farmers to optimize their current practices. So what we need is the weather station, which is relatively cheap, and we need to transform the data from these stations into the recommendation. And this holds for the other services as well. So there's not so much cost from the farmer that he needs to make an own investment on his farm. But we are also exploring business models where the farmer actually buys this advice because it generates additional revenue for him. And this then involves rural advisory service, its intermediaries, and yes.
So it's really starting to be self-sustaining in that way.
We see early steps in this direction, and the vision is clearly there.
Thank you. How is this in Guatemala, Milena?
It's a bit similar because we're not buying any new technology, but what we do is we install the new meteorological stations, and these stations are maintained by the government through their own meteorological service, and the information that is provided to the farmers is completely free of charge. This project is financed by the Green Climate Fund, so there is no cost whatsoever for the farmers. And the same as what Boris is doing with his project is that we provide information to the farmers, but we also provide them advice, agricultural advice and agroclimatological advice, recommendations, and they use it and they mix it with their ancestral knowledge. So in the end, the cost for the farmer is zero and zero investment. On the contrary, they gain, they have a benefit in applying the information on the production because they have a better information, a better production, and they increase their resilience, which is what we're looking for. That's why that's the name of the project, Resilient Highlands.
Thank you very much. So this is a longer term partnership, I understand, where you can offer this service for no fees actually to farmers. And then allowing them also, like in the Tajikistan project, to have better livelihoods. So ultimately you would have a sustainability vision there as well. But partnerships are really important. And so I come back also to the presentation of Peter in the beginning, where we could see also that you link really governments and farmers. You do accompany a lot of this process of the whole value cycle of the weather, water, and climate service that you're offering. How are farmers supported, and what are their resources to implement the changes on the ground?
Thank you. That's a really good question. So yeah, PICSA is free to the farmers in terms of what taking part and the information they receive and joining the training. That's provided by the Government Extension Service or the NGO or whoever's working with the farmers. Often those groups of farmers are already exist and already meeting. So PICSA is kind of fitting into existing structures and systems that are already there. In terms of resources to then make the changes, PICSA has never had the resources, and I don't think we've ever wanted the resources to try and provide resources to farmers to then make changes. And what's really encouraging is that farmers are making changes anyway. Those high percentages, 80, 90% of farmers are making at least one change, and many of them are making more changes. And that, I think, is the switch in terms of agency and empowerment, that people are going through this process and thinking, okay, what can I do? Okay, here's what I can do. This is something I can do on my farm. And that's where looking at the different options comes in, because people can, and planning them is people can then pick things that they can afford to do. There have been some really encouraging examples where people have, I remember one in Zimbabwe, hearing about it afterwards, where farmers identified a particular variety of seed they wanted to get because they looked at the climate information and they wanted to match the variety. They couldn't get it locally, so they clubbed together to pay for one of them to go to the local city on the bus and buy the seed and come back. And there are lots of examples like that. So people find ways to make changes. Now, I think you could go for a win-win where you have a different project perhaps partnering in the same location, and then enabling some of the things that farmers are looking to do. So we always ask farmers, you made changes, but did you want to make more changes? And pretty much everybody says yes. And then you say, why didn't you? And it's, okay, we needed more resources, we needed money, or didn't have enough labor, or we couldn't get the seeds, etc. And I think that's also particularly true for particular categories of farmers. So we haven't seen a difference between wealth levels in terms of whether people make a change, but I think it's the poorest that are most constrained. So very simple things like supporting savings clubs, women's savings clubs, can enable people to then have money to then invest in the changes they want to make. So I think you could have a win-win where you design an enabling environment with simple things like savings clubs, improved seed supply, etc. But very much it's the farmers still, they're the ones that choose the changes they want to make, rather than a project coming and saying, hey, we think you should do X, Y, and Z. I think the psychology is also different, that if farmers are deciding what they want to do, they're much more likely to do it than an external organization promoting particular things. Though, of course, that has an important role to play.
Thank you very much. I think it's very promising what we are hearing. So there are solutions. There are solutions in the communities themselves. And we even saw in these projects that one can get moving also with the authority level and try and support the quality of information, and also the responsibility taken on by authorities to actually make the cycle really work. We also all know that all contexts are very different, and yes, in this sense, I mean, all these projects shed a light on how important the actual context and also the history of a country even, and the institutional context, are to make these weather, water, and climate services work. So I think This has been really rich so far. So with no further ado, we have other questions that we would like to treat, Maria.
Yes, that is true. We have a question in the chat from Nicole Stoltz from Swiss Aid. And she is asking, and I think this question can be directed at any of you who feel like you would like to contribute to her question. What is the advantage of centralized services, for example, in the form of national hydromet services, and compared to fully decentralized climate change monitoring at community level with the cheap weather stations?
I mean, I can answer for Tajikistan. It's possible to do this decentralized only at a community level. But in Tajikistan, I mean, first of all, it's also a bit of a lost potential. Given that the stations are so cheap, you can just as well do the entire country. And in Tajikistan, there's a particular legal situation where the hydromet service has the authority about any weather data which is collected, and therefore needs to give the blessing to such initiatives. And I know that this is different in other countries, but for us this was a reality we had to deal with, and which required some alignment with their interests.
Yes, for example, in the case of Guatemala, the National Meteorological Service is the one who is in charge, who's responsible under authority of the government to collect meteorological and climatological data. Nevertheless, they often have little budget. They don't have enough budgets to install more weather stations throughout the country. But thanks to this project, we have managed to install 18 Class A weather stations, which can be connected to the remaining stations that they have installed throughout the country. And so they can provide a forecast, a weather and climatological forecast, which is more precise and which is safer and quicker, much faster. So the fact that the information is centralized by the government, but that the government allows for this data to be accessed by the different groups of producers, of researchers, or members of the community in general, is very advantageous, so that the climatologists and meteorologists can analyze the data, that they can share it or distribute it throughout the communities. It's a great advantage.
I can come in briefly on that as well. I think the ideal is, of course, is both. They both have their advantages. I think the local data and collection is great for A, it being very locally specific, B, getting the involvement and interest of farmers, and C, as in Boris's great example of that information being used directly, for example, in irrigation. What local cannot do is produce forecasts or analyze long-term records to see what is happening. So I think both, to get a win-win. Often, as the two other speakers have said, budget and capacity limit the ability of the Central Weather Service Met Service to use that local information. However, I think there are lots of initiatives that are improving that. Recently, colleagues that I work with identified 70 volunteer stations in a country with the Met Service, and are now connecting them into the Met service as well. So there's potential for win-win there, where but often it's budget and time and capacity that limit that, because Met services have all of us and lots of other people knocking on their doors, making demands and trying to work with them, which I think is also another issue as well. But I won't introduce another topic.
Thank you for all of the answers. And before we move on to the question of institutionalizing the services with Sonia, I would like to ask a question that is from Jana Junghart of Helvetas. And she is asking, what would be your recommendations to NGOs in terms of understanding the technical skills? As we know, this is a very skills-intensive business. Would you recommend to build up in-house expertise or buy it from external providers? And this is especially to Milena and Boris. Milena, we let you start.
I think that the main thing is to create partnerships. NGOs have to form partnerships with the government sector, with the academic sector, but especially with the communities where they're going to work with, so that they can better understand the needs of the community, but also so that they can provide information that the community can understand, and to also form partnerships with the academic sectors, because they are the ones who can make that scientific analysis and make forecasts beyond short-term forecasts. They can make a long-term and medium-term forecast, and they can make a link with the diverse climate change scenarios. So the first recommendation is to form strategic partnerships.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Milena. Would you now have something to say, Boris?
Yeah. I mean, it's a very good question, a tricky one, Jana. Thanks a lot. I think it depends a little bit on your ambition and the context you work in. I mean, Tajikistan is maybe particularly challenging in that the government will not allow that you come in with a third-party provider who just does it. I mean, that you can buy all these agrometeorological services from a company which brings their own weather stations, does the forecasting, sends out the recommendations, done. If this works for your context, then you don't maybe need a full understanding in-house. On the other hand, I think for developing and really steering such a project, if the NGO is in the lead, then a minimum of such understanding and capacity is really required. Even if you only buy these services from outside, you must be able to understand what these services are. You must be able to judge the delivery. So yeah, but I mean, I don't know, those of you who have been at this first presentation yesterday, I mean, this is precisely where the NGO doesn't have its core strengths, right? This or all these technical dimensions which are embedded in weather, water, climate services. For me, it's also a strategic decision for an NGO whether the NGO wants to position itself on this topic. Then it may require more of such understanding and technical skills. It depends on where the NGO wants to go.
Thank you, Boris, and thank you all also for making these points. It does link nicely back into the session of yesterday, where we looked at the cases of NGOs in 5 different places in the world, how they came up basically with water and climate services, in some cases almost together with farmers on their own. And we can see here that it is technical information. There is a lot that can be done bottom up. We have seen that here too, but there's also some proofing that needs expertise, whether this is in-house or out of the house of the NGOs. And both have advantages and disadvantages, as has been shown. It's really a question of where you want to go. But there still remains a bit of a, at least for me from the session of yesterday, a question mark, in the sense that we sort of, because we discussed the role of our organizations, because we jump in and make it work in a way, the question is, from my side, do you know of projects, or have you also encountered your own project that is exiting also in a good way? Do you feel like at some stage this is the type of project where you can hand over to the local stakeholders at some stage? Do you have, as Boris has said, do you have that strategic vision, or what is your take? What is your take there? Because we are in some cases really doing a bit of everything to make it work. That's why I'm asking the question. So this is a question probably to who would like to take it on.
I think, Peter, we got a very interesting example from you, from the institutionalization case. So we'd like to hear more about that, please.
Yeah, I think actually when we start in a country, we have some general goals, which are firstly to get something working, but very much with partners and with ownership of partners. And one of the key partners is the Met services, and another is the agricultural extension providers, whether they be government or others. And I think getting quality, getting it working, getting results back from evaluations so that everybody can learn from that, and preparing for scaling and also exit, so sustainability and scaling. So I think those are kind of there right at the beginning. Now, how it plays out in each country depends on the context, and in some cases it's very successful, and in some cases it's not, and you hit big bumps along the road as you go. But I think it's in your mind right from the beginning that that's where you're trying to get to. And I think then actually, yeah, we have seen that. For example, in Malawi, it's now within the organizations, within the institutions, it has a life of its own. If we never go back, I want to go back because I'm really interested, but actually it will carry on. So I think that has to be there right from the beginning in your thinking. Yeah, I think that's all I can kind of say at the moment. Yeah. And it's about relationships as well, and taking opportunities as they go along, because I think, as we all know, things can take many different directions as you're going along. And often getting those key people involved early on that catch a vision for what's happening can prove very important later on in decision making. Yeah.
Thank you dearly for those insights. So we all want to go to Malawi now.
Yeah, and to Tajikistan.
And to
nice
Tajikistan and to Guatemala, of course. Okay, so I think at this stage, if you don't want to add, I don't want to cut anybody from taking the floor on this one, but we could now open the floor and let people speak for themselves. We have been handling the chat so far, but I think there are more questions around. So please put on your camera, maybe hold up your hand so that we can see you, and then you could unmute and announce yourself who you are and what your question or commentary is. No, I don't see any hands. I don't know if it's me.
I do not see any hands either.
Okay, okay. I don't think we have answered everything that was asked in the chat, so maybe you want to come back or on one or the other question there. And just speak your question.
Well, in case no one wants to speak a question, I could read out a question of Benita Dornbos from oh no, there is one
have a
from
hand.
Joe.
Joe, please.
Yes, thank you. I would have a question. Firstly, I wanted to address it to Milena, but maybe I can address it to all of the speakers. What I find quite interesting, especially in Milena's presentation, is what the Altiplano Resiliente. It reminds me very much of the project which our partners are doing, and we see there are lots of actors around, NGO actors, doing similar things, and there's one institution, the National Hydromet Institution, in the case of Guatemala, in Cibume, who should then coordinate these issues. And on the other hand side, my question is, as all these NGO initiatives are there because the National Hydromet Services do not play their role as they should do it. Right now, we have several NGOs coming in, filling the gaps, bridging the last mile, but somebody should coordinate it. But very often, or how do you see the ability of the National Hydromet Services to coordinate the different activities going on within a country or region of a country? That I would be interested in to know.
Yes, in Central America, we have a National Hydrological Resources Committee, which belongs to the Central American Integration System. And this is a meteorological services network, which includes all of Central America. And they, every 3 months, they issue weather forecasts. It includes data from each of the national meteorological services. They have a very good data information, very good professionals, and very good tools. Nevertheless, often their budgets are not enough. They don't to be able to install enough weather stations throughout their countries. And as Boris and Peter mentioned, the information, the community information, and with weather stations, with the most precise station, which is at local community level, but the national stations, the national information is what can give you the perspective, the forecast, what is going to occur at medium and a long term. So what is required is a partnership between of what the NGOs and the international institutions form with the projects and with the national weather services, what they do with the information that they can collect. It doesn't have to do if some are doing their work well and others are not doing their work well. Everybody's doing a good job. What is required is to improve on what is being done and with the data that's being collected.
But the coordination really also has to come from the services of the government, is also what you're saying, right? The coordination aspect.
Yes, that has to do a little bit with my question. What I see, the information is complemented. The information that the national services have with the information obtained by the different initiatives from the NGOs and from the communities. Nevertheless, I see that in order to coordinate and these two aspects, what is your opinion on this, on the level of the coordination? How can it improve, and how is it working thus far? It is working well because governments are the ones who in the end provide sustainability to the meteorological services. The projects can last 3, 4, 5 years and then they exit, but the information and the capacity that is installed is left there. It remains with the professionals that are working there full time and with the stations, the equipment that's been installed, and the professionals are working there for several years. So it's very interesting to be able to strengthen the professionals who are working in the meteorological services, and the government provide an annual budget to be able to maintain the data and information, but at the same time that the projects that are coming from other countries, that they should strengthen the scientific and technical skills of these professionals, but also they should provide this training to the local populations, and so that they can understand the meteorological information better, so that they can.
I could not have thought of a better resume, of a better summary of how it's supposed to work. Thank you very much to all of you for these insights and very honest discussion. Thank you for the interesting questions in the chat. Thank you for also taking the floor in the end. We have run out of time here, but we are available if you have more questions or want to write to us. And we would also be asking our dear panelists then if they would want to answer one or the other question and could forward that question if needed. So thank you to all. Please join in the other sessions that are still on until tomorrow, and have a wonderful day, and enjoy the rest of the time in this conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And goodbye.
Bye-bye.